You assume the forgotten daughter eventually just fades away, handing over the keys with a polite smile. But when I slid that single cream envelope across the starched white linen, my sister's champagne glass froze in midair. Her face went pale, and she screamed, "You are joking!" so loudly that the band died out. I did not just walk away that night. I rewired the entire legacy while they were too busy posing for pictures. My name is Nora Ellison, and for the better part of the last decade, I have existed as a ghost within the walls of my own family. I was not dead. Of course, I was sitting right there at the far end of the long, banquet-style table, occupying a physical space that had been set with heavy silverware and a crystal water goblet. But as I watched the scene unfold in the private dining room of the Riverton Chop House, I knew that to the 25 people gathered under the soft glow of the chandeliers, I was little more than furniture. Useful, sturdy, and entirely unworthy of a spotlight. The room was suffocatingly elegant. My mother, Denise, had insisted on the navy linens because she felt they conveyed a sense of regal authority, a necessary backdrop for what she had titled the Ellison Family Legacy Night. A custom neon sign with those exact words buzzed softly against the mahogany wall, casting a blue-white light over the white roses that choked the center of the table. It looked less like a retirement dinner and more like a coronation. And in a way, it was. I took a slow sip of my water, my eyes tracking my father. Mark? He was standing at the head of the table, his face flushed with the rosy hue of too much expensive Cabernet and the adrenaline of being the center of attention. He tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute, a sharp, piercing chime that silenced the low hum of conversation. "If everyone could settle down, please," my father said, his voice booming with the practiced charisma of a man who had spent 30 years charming wealthy families into entrusting us with their elderly parents. He placed a heavy hand on the shoulder of my younger sister, Sophie. She was seated to his immediate right, glowing in a silk dress that cost more than my first car. "We have been running Evergreen Haven for 3 decades, my father began, his eyes misty. Denise and I started with nothing but a second mortgage and a dream to care for the greatest generation. But we always knew that we were building it for something bigger. We were building it for the future." He squeezed Sophie's shoulder, and she beamed, tilting her head just enough to catch the light. "And tonight," my father continued, his voice thick with emotion, "we are finally passing the torch. It is the proudest moment of a father's life to look at his child and see the leader she was born to be. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the future of everything we built, the new executive director of Evergreen Haven, my daughter, Sophie Ellison." The applause was polite but enthusiastic. Sophie brought a hand to her chest, feigning a breathless surprise that she had rehearsed in the mirror for a week. "Oh, stop, Daddy," she laughed, though she didn't mean it. She leaned into him, the picture of the dutiful, brilliant heir. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin, sniffing loudly enough to be heard 3 chairs away. "She gave up so much to come back to us," Denise told the table at large, her voice trembling theatrically. "She had such a vibrant life in the city, a huge career in media, but when we called, she dropped everything. That is just the kind of heart she has." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I thought about Sophie's huge career, which mostly consisted of 3 unpaid internships and a lifestyle blog that had not been updated since 2019. I thought about the sacrifice of moving back home, which actually involved my parents paying off her credit card debt, which sat somewhere around $15,000, and leasing her a brand new white Range Rover as a welcome home gift. Then, inevitably, my mother's gaze flickered to me at the end of the table. It was a brief, dismissive glance, the kind you give a coat rack. "And of course," Denise added, almost as an afterthought, waving a hand vaguely in my direction, "we are so lucky to have Nora. She is always our rock in the background, keeping the filing cabinets tidy so Sophie can fly, right?" A few guests offered me tight, pitying smiles. I did not smile back. I did not nod. I simply reached down to the empty chair beside me, where I had placed my bag, and withdrew 2 items. The first was a thin navy blue leather folder. The second was a thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax. I placed them on the table in front of me, lining them up with the edge of my charger plate with the precision of a surgeon. I adjusted the folder a fraction of an inch to the left. Then I smoothed the envelope. The movements were small, but I felt a strange, cold energy radiating from me. It was the feeling of a bomb technician who had decided to stop cutting wires and simply let the timer run down. Down the table, the conversation had shifted to the logistics of the transition. A man named Greg, an accountant who had been handling my father's personal taxes for 10 years, but had never once looked at the facility's operating ledger, leaned toward Sophie. "Don't worry about the transition period. Soph," Greg said, laughing as he swirled his wine. "The boring legal stuff is already handled. The machine runs itself. Honestly, all you have to do is sign where they tell you and smile for the camera. You are going to be great." Sophie preened, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I know, right? I told Daddy I want to focus on the vision. We need to rebrand. I'm thinking less nursing home and more boutique wellness living. Nora can handle the compliance junk. That is her little zone." She giggled. My parents laughed with her. That was the moment. The laughter was the trigger. It wasn't a sudden snap of anger. It was a cold, clarifying realization that I had waited long enough. I stood up. My chair did not scrape against the floor. I rose with the silent, fluid grace of someone who had spent years walking down hospital corridors at 3 a.m, so as not to wake the residents. The movement caught the room's attention. My father paused, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Nora? Honey, we aren't doing the toasts yet. Sit down." I ignored him. I picked up the cream envelope and the leather folder. I walked the length of the table, my heels sinking into the plush carpet. The conversation died out, one voice at a time, until the only sound was the clinking of silverware from the main dining room outside our private enclave. I stopped behind my father's chair, but I did not look at him. I looked at Sophie. She looked up at me, her smile faltering just a little. "What is that? A congratulations card? You didn't have to make a speech." "Nora, God, don't be awkward." I didn't say a word. I simply leaned over the table and slid the cream envelope toward her. The sound of the heavy paper sliding across the starched linen was louder than it should have been. It sounded like a blade being sharpened. "This is yours," I said. My voice was low, steady, and completely devoid of the deferential warmth I had used for 30 years. "You should read it first." Sophie rolled her eyes, playing to the audience. "Okay, mysterious, whatever." She tore open the seal with a manicured fingernail. Expecting, I was sure, a sappy letter about how lucky I was to support her. She pulled out the document. It was 3 pages long, stapled in the corner. I watched her eyes. She scanned the first paragraph, her expression smug, ready to make a joke. Then, her eyes stopped moving. She blinked. She read the same line again. The color began to drain from her face, starting at her cheeks and washing down to her neck. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a dawn of total confusion, which quickly darkened into horror. She flipped to the second page. Her hand began to shake. The paper rattled, a dry, insect-like sound in the silent room. She looked at the third page. Then she looked up at our parents, her eyes wide and wet with panic. "What is this?" she whispered. "What is it, sweetie?" my mother asked, leaning in, her smile tight with concern. "Is it a poem?" Sophie stood up so abruptly her chair screeched backward, tipping over and hitting the floor with a deafening crash. The entire table flinched. "You are joking!" Sophie screamed. Her voice cracked, high and shrill, shattering the elegant atmosphere. "You are joking! Tell me this is a joke!" She looked at me, her eyes wild, searching for a punchline, but I was not smiling. I was standing perfectly still, my hand resting on the unopened leather folder I had placed in front of my father. "I am not joking," I said softly. Sophie slammed the papers down onto the table. "You can't do this! You can't just take it!" "I didn't take anything," I replied, my voice cool and even. "I just formalized the reality of the last 10 years. The band outside the banquet hall seemed to fall silent at that exact second. The room was frozen. My father was staring at the folder under my hand, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. He didn't know what was in it yet, but looking at my face, really looking at me for the first time in his life, he knew it was the end of the world he thought he controlled. This was the moment the house of cards collapsed. But to understand why I was the one who pulled the bottom card, and why I didn't feel a shred of guilt as I watched my sister hyperventilate, you have to understand that this didn't start tonight. It started 20 years ago, in a kitchen that smelled of fried onions and disinfectant, when I learned the first rule of the Ellison family. Sophie was the portrait, and I was just the frame. The Riverton Chop House smells like truffle oil and expensive cologne, but my childhood smelled like industrial lemon disinfectant and frying onions. That was the scent of the first Evergreen Haven, back before the renovations and the marketing rebranding, when it was just a converted 2-story building on the edge of town, where the carpet was always slightly sticky and the radiators hissed like angry snakes. We lived in a cramped apartment attached to the back of the facility. The line between home and work did not exist for us. Our living room shared a wall with the nurses' station, and our kitchen was effectively the overflow pantry for the cafeteria. But while I lived in the spillover of the business, Sophie lived in the spotlight of the family. My father, Mark, was an ex-paramedic who missed the adrenaline of the ambulance but loved the adoration of a crowd. He treated the hallways of the facility like his personal stage. I remember being 8 years old, walking 10 paces behind him during his morning rounds. He would carry Sophie, who was 5 at the time, perched on his hip like a little princess. She had these ringlets of golden hair that my mother spent 30 minutes curling every morning, and Mark would parade her into the common room. "Look who is here to brighten your day," he would boom, his voice warm and inviting. The residents, lonely and starving for youth, would light up. They would reach out with trembling, paper-thin hands to pinch Sophie's cheeks. She would giggle and hide her face in Mark's neck, playing the part of the shy angel perfectly. Mark would beam, soaking up the praise as if having a cute daughter was a personal accomplishment on par with curing a disease. And there I was, trailing in the wake of their applause. I was not being carried. I was pushing an empty wheelchair that was too wide for my small arms, struggling to keep it from bumping into the walls. Mark told me it was good practice for when I was older. I was invisible, just a small set of hands navigating the equipment while the stars of the show took their bows. This dynamic was not accidental. It was curated. My mother, Denise, was the architect of our family narrative, and she had decided early on that Sophie was the protagonist. Sophie was the one with the spark. Sophie was the one who needed to be nurtured. I was simply the one who was there. I remember the weekends vividly. Saturdays were reserved for Sophie's development. Denise would drive her 40 minutes into the city for private dance lessons, or art camps, or vocal coaching. They would come home flushed and excited, talking about Sophie's lines and her potential. Denise would post photos on social media of Sophie in a tutu or holding a paintbrush, captioned with things like, "Our little star shining bright," or "So proud of this creative soul." While they were gone, I stayed at the facility. I sat at the reception desk, answering phones that I was barely old enough to manage, or I helped the cleaning crew fold hundreds of white towels in the basement laundry room. When Mark walked past me, he would nod distractedly. "Good girl." "Nora," he would say, not breaking his stride. "You are so mature." That was my currency. Maturity. It was the consolation prize given to the child who requires the least amount of effort. I learned that being mature meant never asking for anything that might inconvenience the schedule of the star. I remember asking once if I could join a soccer team. The practice was on Tuesday afternoons. Denise sighed, a long, heavy exhale that signaled I had just created a massive logistical problem. "Honey," she said, putting a hand on my shoulder, "Tuesday is Sophie's pottery class. Daddy is working the floor, And I have to drive her. If I have to drive you too, who is going to help Mrs. Higgins with her dinner tray? You know she only likes it when you do it. Do you want Mrs. Higgins to be sad? So I didn't play soccer. I stayed home and fed Mrs. Higgins, and Denise told everyone at church how selfless I was, framing my lack of a childhood as a noble character trait rather than a requirement of her schedule. This disparity bled into everything, especially money. If Sophie wanted something, it was treated as an investment, a weekend retreat to a lakeside cabin for her drama club. That was investing in her confidence, a new wardrobe because she felt her old clothes stifled her expression. That was investing in her brand. But when I asked for a graphing calculator for advanced math, Mark frowned at the price tag and asked if I could just borrow one from the school library because the business margins were tight that month. The academic difference was perhaps the most stinging. I was a straight-A student. I didn't get good grades because I was a genius. I got them because I studied with a desperate, quiet intensity, hoping that if I was perfect on paper, someone would finally look at me with the same awe they reserved for Sophie's mediocre tap dance recitals. I would bring home a report card with perfect marks, laying it on the kitchen table. Mark would glance at it while eating a sandwich. "Knew you would, kiddo," he would mumble, turning the page of his newspaper. "You are the smart one." That was it. No dinner, no celebration, just the confirmation that I had met the baseline expectation. But if Sophie managed to scrape a B- in history, Denise would throw a party. She would bake a cake and invite the neighbors, clapping her hands and saying, "She worked so hard for this. We have to celebrate her effort." The lesson was clear. My success was a utility. It was expected so that they didn't have to worry about me. Sophie's success was a miracle that required fanfare. The breaking point, or perhaps the hardening point, came the year I turned 14. Sophie's birthday is in June. That year, Denise went all out. She rented a photo booth, which was a huge expense at the time, and hired a DJ. She bought sparkler candles that shot gold flames 2 feet into the air. The backyard was filled with people, laughter, and music. I spent the entire party running back and forth to the kitchen, refilling the punch bowl, wiping up spills, and holding guests' coats because the closet was full. At one point, Denise handed me her camera. "Make sure you get a good angle of your sister blowing out the candles," she instructed. "Don't cut off her head like last time." I took the picture. I watched Sophie close her eyes and make a wish, surrounded by applause. My birthday is 2 months later, in August. I woke up that morning expecting something, not a DJ, not a pony, just an acknowledgement that I existed. I walked into the kitchen. The house was silent. My parents were not there. Sophie was not there. On the counter sat a plastic container from the grocery store. Inside was a generic vanilla sheet cake, the kind with the sweating, artificial frosting. It was not on a plate. It was just sitting there in the plastic clamshell. Stuck to the lid was a yellow sticky note in my father's handwriting. "Happy B-Day, kiddo. Mom took Sophie to the mall for back-to-school clothes. Shift at 5? We are short a nurse. Love, Dad." I stared at the note for a long time. I remember the hum of the refrigerator. I remember the way the sunlight hit the dust motes dancing in the air. I didn't cry. I think I had cried enough over the years to dry up that particular well. Instead, a cold, hard knot formed in my chest. I ate a piece of the cake with a fork. Standing up at the counter, it tasted like wax and sugar. Then I threw the rest in the trash, put on my scrubs, and went to work at 5 o'clock. That was the day I stopped looking for their approval and started looking at their operations. If they were going to treat me like an employee, I decided I would be the best employee they had ever seen, but not for them, for me. I stopped asking for permission. I stopped asking for trips. I retreated into the one place where the rules made sense, the paperwork. By the time I was 16, I knew the medication schedule of every resident in the building better than the head nurse. I memorized the state compliance handbook. I knew which residents were diabetic, which ones were flight risks, and which families were likely to sue if their mother lost a hearing aid. I found comfort in the precision of it. The facility was a machine, And while my parents were busy polishing the hood ornament that was Sophie, I was the one learning how the engine worked. I learned that my father often forgot to sign off on narcotic logs. I learned that my mother categorized personal dinners as marketing expenses on the ledger. I saw the cracks in the foundation that they were too busy smiling to notice. I became the ghost in the machine. I was everywhere and nowhere. Denise loved it. She told the extended family at Thanksgiving that I was such a little helper and that I never caused any trouble. She would say it while hugging Sophie, who was usually talking loudly about her latest audition or the boy she was dating. "See?" Denise would say to my aunts. "Sophie is the fire, and Nora is the water. We need both." She didn't realize that water, given enough time and pressure, can cut through stone. The defining image of my adolescence happened on a Christmas Eve when I was 17. We were in the main lobby of Evergreen Haven. My mother had hired a professional photographer to take a Christmas card photo for the business newsletter. She arranged Mark and herself in front of the large, decorated tree. She pulled Sophie into the center, adjusting her red velvet dress and smoothing her hair. They smiled. The perfect benevolent family dedicated to caring for the elderly. The flash went off, capturing their bright, happy faces. I was not in the frame. I was standing 10 feet away, leaning against the reception desk, holding a stack of patient charts that needed to be filed before the holiday shift change. I looked at the dark window behind them. In the reflection of the glass, I could see them, the bright, shining trio, and behind them, a faint, gray shadow holding a clipboard. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt dangerous, because while they were posing for the camera, I was holding the keys to the filing cabinet. I realized then that while they were obsessed with how things looked, I was the only one who knew how things actually were. And I knew, with the terrifying certainty of a neglected child who has grown up too fast, that one day, that difference would matter. I just had to wait. I had to wait, and I had to work, and I had to let them believe that the shadow in the background would stay there forever. Little did they know, the shadow was taking notes. My 20s were not defined by parties or discovery or the reckless freedom that young people are supposed to enjoy. My 20s were defined by the hum of the vending machine in the break room at 3 a.m. and the weight of textbooks on my lap as I studied for my business administration degree between checking catheters and calming down residents with dementia who were sundowning. While I was juggling night classes and working 50-hour weeks at Evergreen Haven because we were perpetually understaffed, my sister Sophie was living a very different life 2 hours away in Lakeview City. She had moved there ostensibly to launch a career in media. In reality, she was launching a career in being supported. She rented a loft in the trendy arts district, a space with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more in a month than I earned in 3. I knew this because I was the one who often deposited the checks my father wrote to cover her rent. He called them loans. We all knew they were gifts. I would sit at the nurse's station at midnight, scrolling through my phone during a lull, and there she would be. Sophie posted daily updates of her life as a quote-unquote content creator. There were videos of her arranging tulips in her expensive kitchen, videos of her drinking mimosas on a Tuesday, and curated apartment tours where she talked about the importance of creating a sanctuary for one's mental health. Meanwhile, my sanctuary was a shared office with a broken heater and a stack of payroll disputes that my father did not have the patience to resolve. Mark had developed a convenient habit during those years. He would hire new staff, realize he didn't want to train them, and then dump the responsibility on me. "Nora, you handle the onboarding," he would say, clapping me on the shoulder. "I trust you more than these new hires. You know how we like things done." It was a trap disguised as a compliment. The reality of my position became terrifyingly clear the night my father had his first heart scare. It was a Tuesday in November. I was in the back office reconciling the petty cash when I heard a thud from the hallway. I found Mark clutching his chest, his face gray and sweating. I did not panic. I did not scream. My training kicked in instantly. I called emergency services, administered aspirin, and monitored his vitals until the paramedics arrived. I rode in the ambulance with him, holding his hand while he wheezed about how he couldn't leave the business yet. At the emergency room, while the doctors ran tests to rule out a massive infarction. I was the one filling out the admission forms. I knew his social security number, his insurance group ID, and his medical history by heart. I answered every question the triage nurse asked because Mark was too frightened to speak. When my mother finally arrived, she rushed to his bedside, weeping and stroking his hair. She didn't ask me what had happened. She didn't ask if I was okay. "Go back to the facility." "Nora," she said, not looking at me. "Someone needs to lock up. We can't leave the night shift unsupervised." So I did. I took a cab back to Evergreen Haven. I walked into the building, still smelling of the hospital antiseptic, and I worked until 7 the next morning because the night supervisor had called out sick. I cried for exactly 5 minutes in the bathroom stall, washed my face with cold water, and then went out to serve breakfast. After that incident, a subtle shift occurred. My mother started referring to me in hushed, private tones as our little operations wizard. She would tell her friends at the country club that the business would fall apart without me, but she said it with a laugh, as if my competence was a quirky little hobby. Publicly, however, the narrative remained untouched. Denise posted a long, emotional tribute to Mark's recovery on social media. She wrote about the resilience of the Ellison family and tagged Sophie, writing that her daughter was building a brand in the city that would one day take Evergreen to the next level. I was not mentioned in the post. I was the one who had saved his life and kept the business running that night. But Sophie was the one tagged as the future. The state inspectors, however, were not swayed by Instagram captions. Regulations in the elder care industry were tightening. The state began sending auditors unannounced. These were serious people with clipboards and zero patience for charm. Mark, who had always relied on his handshake and his smile to get by, found himself floundering when they asked about updated fire safety protocols or medication error reporting ratios. I remember a specific inspection in the spring of that year. The lead inspector, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Gable, walked right past my father, who was trying to offer her coffee. She came straight to my desk. "I need to speak to Nora Ellison," she said. I looked up from my computer. "I am Nora." "Mrs. Gable nodded. "You are the only one who signs the compliance logs correctly. I have a question about the staffing variance from last month. I assume you are the administrator?" I felt my face heat up. "No, ma'am," I said quietly. "My title is assistant manager." "Mrs. Gable looked at me over the rim of her glasses. She looked at the stack of files on my desk, then at my father, who was hovering nervously in the doorway. She didn't say anything, but the look she gave me was one of profound, professional pity. She knew exactly who was running the building. The contrast between my reality and Sophie's fantasy world reached its peak that summer. I had planned a rare weekend away. My college roommate was getting married in Cincinnati, just a 3-hour drive. I had requested the time off 2 months in advance. I had bought a dress. I had booked a hotel room. I was actually excited. On Friday afternoon, 3 hours before I was supposed to leave, the head nurse quit. She walked out in the middle of a shift, leaving us dangerously below ratio. I went to Mark's office. He was staring at the roster, looking defeated. "I can't cover it." "Nora," he said, rubbing his temples, "we have the Chamber of Commerce dinner tonight. You know how important that is for networking." He didn't order me to stay. He just looked at me with that pathetic, helpless expression he knew I couldn't resist. I canceled the hotel. I hung the dress back in the closet. I missed the wedding. I spent that Friday night passing out medication cups and helping residents into their pajamas. Around 10 o'clock, I sat down in the break room and opened social media. There was a new video from Sophie. She was wearing a plush white robe, sitting on a balcony overlooking a vineyard. Her eyes were puffy, as if she had been crying, but the lighting was perfect. "Hey guys," she whispered into the camera. "Just wanted to keep it real with you. I have been so burnt out lately. The city, the pressure to create. It is just a lot." My amazing mom saw how much I was struggling and surprised me with a gifted spa weekend to recharge. So grateful for family who understands mental health. She took a sip of cucumber water and smiled a brave, fragile smile. I stared at the screen. My mother had paid for a $1,000 spa weekend because Sophie was tired of taking pictures of herself. I had just canceled my best friend's wedding to wipe oatmeal off a bib because my father wanted to go to a dinner party. The anger didn't burn hot this time. It turned cold. It settled in my stomach like a stone. The next morning, Mark came in, hungover but cheerful. He saw me at the desk, dark circles under my eyes. "I don't know what we would do without you, kiddo," he said, grabbing a donut. "You are the glue." Then, without missing a beat, he showed me his phone. "Look at this text from Sophie. She says she is having a breakthrough on her vision for the company. She says she is almost ready to come home and lead. One day, Nora, all this will be hers. She just needs time to find herself." The final straw was a letter. It came from the daughter of a resident named Mrs. Higgins, the woman I had fed dinner to since I was a child. Mrs. Higgins had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her daughter sent a card, handwritten, addressed to the facility. "Dear Ellison family," it read, "thank you for the care you gave my mother, but specifically, thank you to Nora. Nora, you were the only one who knew how she liked her pillows arranged. You were the one who sat with her when she was scared. We will never forget your kindness." It was beautiful. It was the kind of validation that kept me going. 2 days later, I saw the card on the Evergreen Haven Facebook page. My mother had posted a photo of it, but she had cropped the image. She had cropped out the bottom half where my name was mentioned. The caption read, "So touched by this note from the Higgins family. This is why we do what we do. It is a family dedication." And then, she tagged Sophie. Sophie, who had not set foot in the facility in 6 months. Sophie, who probably didn't even know Mrs. Higgins was dead. I looked at the post. I looked at the likes rolling in. The comments praising Sophie and my parents for their heart of gold. Something in my brain rewired itself in that moment. I realized that to them, I was not a person. I was an appliance. I was a refrigerator. You don't thank a refrigerator for keeping the milk cold. You just expect it to work. And if the refrigerator starts making noise, you get annoyed. But if the refrigerator stops working, everything spoils. I didn't quit. I didn't scream. I went back to the office. It was late, past midnight. The building was quiet. I sat down at my computer. I opened a new document. The cursor blinked at me, a steady, rhythmic pulse on the white screen. I typed a title, "What I Actually Do Here." And then I began to type. I listed every protocol I had written. I listed every state survey I had managed. I listed the passwords that only I knew. I scanned the uncropped version of Mrs. Higgins's letter and saved it to a private folder. I downloaded the email where Mark admitted he didn't know how to access the payroll server. I found the bank transfer receipts for Sophie's loans and saved them too. I wasn't building a resume anymore. I was building a dossier. I didn't know when I would need it or what I would use it for. I just knew that if they were going to erase me from the story, I was going to keep a copy of the original manuscript. I sat there in the blue glow of the monitor, the only person awake in the entire building, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt like the witness, and witnesses are the most dangerous people in the room, provided they write everything down. If the birthday cake incident was the emotional breaking point, the influenza outbreak of 2018 was the structural one. That was the year the floorboards of our family dynamic finally rotted through, revealing the dangerous machinery grinding away underneath. It hit the county in late January, a particularly vicious strain that seemed to bypass vaccinations and settle deep in the lungs. In a standard business, a flu outbreak means lost productivity. In a senior care facility, it is a siege event. It means isolation protocols, mountains of medical waste, terrified families, and a state health board watching your census numbers like a hawk. Within 4 days, 40% of our nursing staff called out sick. By the end of the week, 3 aides quit on the spot because they were terrified of bringing the virus home to their own children. Evergreen Haven was bleeding personnel, and the state-mandated ratios of caregiver to resident were flashing red. My father, Mark, crumbled. For all his talk of being a veteran paramedic, the reality of a slow-moving administrative disaster terrified him. He could handle a heart attack, something quick, decisive, and heroic. He could not handle the grinding attrition of a staffing crisis. He locked himself in his office, staring at the spreadsheets as if he could will the numbers to change. I did not have the luxury of freezing. For 9 straight days, I did not go back to my apartment. I moved into an unused storage office on the 2nd floor. I slept on a camping cot I found in the basement, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that smelled of mothballs. I worked 16-hour shifts, pivoting between administrative triage and direct patient care. I changed linens. I spoon-fed broth to feverish residents. I argued with staffing agencies on the phone at 2 a.m, begging them to send us temp nurses at double the hourly rate. It was during the darkest hour of that week, literally, around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, that the power shift happened. We had just received a notice of an impending emergency inspection. Mark was sitting at his desk, his face pale, holding a stack of vendor contracts he didn't understand. We needed to authorize emergency overtime pay, order $5,000 worth of PPE, and sign off on a liability waiver for a temporary medical director because our usual doctor was hospitalized. Mark's hands were shaking. "I can't track all this. Nora," he whispered, his voice thin. "I don't know which account holds the reserve funds. I don't know the legal language for the waiver. If I mess this up, they will shut us down." He pushed a document toward me. It was a durable power of attorney for business and medical decisions. "Just take it," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Take the authority, make the decisions, sign whatever needs to be signed. Just get us through this until the sun comes out again. It is just temporary, okay? Just until I get my feet back under me." I looked at the document. It was broad, dangerously broad. It gave the designated agent, me, the power to enter contracts, manage banking, hire and fire, and make binding operational decisions on behalf of the owner. I signed it, not because I wanted power, but because if I didn't, 38 elderly people might lose their home. With that pen stroke, I became the CEO in everything but name. I authorized the spending, I hired the temps, I reorganized the quarantine zones, and while I was doing this, barely washing my hair, eating vending machine crackers for dinner, my mother decided the best way to help was to handle the optics. Denise organized a thank you brunch for the families of our residents to reassure them that Evergreen Haven was strong. It was held at a hotel ballroom down the street because the facility was on lockdown. I could not attend. I was literally unclogging a toilet in room 204 because the maintenance man was out with a fever. But I heard about the speeches. One of the temp nurses, a kind woman named Brenda, who didn't know our family history, came to me later. "Your mom gave a lovely speech," Brenda told me while we were charting vitals. "She talked about how the whole family is pulling together. She mentioned your sister, Sophie, quite a bit. It is so sweet that she is sending her prayers from the city. Your mom said Sophie's spiritual support is the backbone of this place." I stopped writing. The pen dug into the paper. "Did she mention who was running the isolation unit?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Brenda paused. "Oh, well, she said, our dedicated staff. That includes you, right?" I didn't answer. I just went back to work. When the outbreak finally subsided, the facility that emerged was not the same one that had gone in. It was tighter, leaner, better. I didn't just patch the holes. I rebuilt the hull. I realized that our old paper-based medication records were a liability, so I implemented a digital tracking system. I wrote new safety protocols, color-coded by urgency. I created a checklist system for shift changes that eliminated the he said, she said errors that used to plague us. The chaos of the flu had given me the cover I needed to modernize Evergreen Haven without asking for permission. I simply told my parents these were state requirements, and they believed me because they were too lazy to check the regulations themselves. The results were undeniable. In the regional quarterly meeting that spring, the state inspector, the same Mrs. Gable who had pitied me years ago, stopped the presentation to highlight our new infectious disease protocol. If you want to see how a small facility should run, she told the room of administrators, look at Evergreen Haven. Their documentation is flawless. After the meeting, a discharge planner from the main hospital in Riverton cornered me near the coffee urn. Nora, she said, lowering her voice, strictly off the record? We used to hesitate to send complex cases to your place. We weren't sure the oversight was there. But lately, you are the first call on my list. We know who actually runs that place, and we trust you. It was a heady drug, that respect. It was the first time I felt seen by my peers. But at home, the narrative was spinning in reverse. Sophie's media career in Lakeview City was imploding. She had been fired from a hosting gig at a local lifestyle channel after 3 months. According to her, it was sabotage. She posted long, tearful videos about toxic work environments and how people were intimidated by her authentic light. She came home for a weekend visit, looking thin and tragic. My parents fawned over her. They sat in the living room, listening to her tales of woe, shaking their heads at the injustice of the world. They just don't recognize real talent, Mark said, patting Sophie's hand. You are too good for them, honey. I just feel so lost, Sophie sniffed. I feel like I need a safety net. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, I sat in the kitchen with my parents. I had the quarterly financial report in front of me. The numbers were up. Customer satisfaction was up. Compliance was perfect. Dad, I said gently. Mom, I think we need to talk about my role. Mark looked up from his crossword puzzle. What do you mean, kiddo? You are doing great. I am doing the job of an administrator and a director of nursing. I said, I have the power of attorney. I am running the building. I think it is time we made it official. I want the title of executive director, and I want the salary that matches the market rate. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Denise looked at Mark. Mark looked at the table. Nora, Mark said, using his reasonable dad voice, you know we appreciate you, God. We couldn't do this without you. But you know the margins. We just spent a fortune on the new HVAC system, and we are helping Sophie with her rent until she gets back on her feet. We just can't afford a big salary bump right now. It is not just the money, I said. It is the authority. I want the title. Titles don't matter in a family, Denise chimed in, smiling that tight, dismissive smile. We all pitch in. You know who you are, Nora. You don't need a piece of paper to tell you that. Besides, if we give you the title, it makes it look like we are pushing Sophie out of the succession plan. We have to keep things open for her. There it was, the truth, naked and ugly. I was the engine, but they were saving the driver's seat for someone who didn't even know how to start the car. Okay, I said. I understand. I stood up and washed my mug. I dried it. I put it away. That night, I went back to the facility office. I unlocked the safe and took out the power of attorney document. I sat under the buzzing fluorescent light and read it again. I read every single clause. I read the part about full authority to enter into binding contracts. I read the part about authority to organize, reorganize, or restructure business entities. I read the part about the document remaining in effect until revoked in writing. Mark had signed it in a panic, thinking it was a shield to protect him from the flu crisis. He had never asked for it back. He had forgotten it existed, or he assumed it was just another piece of boring legal stuff that I filed away. He was right. I had filed it away. But I realized then that he had not just given me the ability to order gloves and sign timesheets. He had given me the keys to the kingdom. He just didn't realize that I was no longer his loyal subject. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I took out a fireproof document box I had bought with my own money 2 days prior. I placed the power of attorney inside. Then, I printed the email where Mark refused my raise. I put that in the box. I printed the ledger showing the payments to Sophie's landlord in Lakeview City. I put that in the box. I printed the state inspection report that named me as the primary contact. I closed the lid and locked it. I took a piece of masking tape and wrote a label on the front in messy black marker. Something so boring that neither my father nor my sister would ever look at it twice. I wrote, "Old tax stuff, 2018 to 2016. I slid the box onto the bottom shelf, behind a stack of toner cartridges. If they wouldn't give me the title, I would keep the power, and I would wait for the moment when the difference between the two would cost them everything. 3 years after the flu outbreak, the air in my parents' house changed. It wasn't a sudden shift, like a storm front moving in. It was gradual, like the slow leak of carbon monoxide, invisible, odorless, and capable of killing you before you realized you were in danger. My father's health had dipped again. It wasn't a dramatic heart attack this time, but a creeping exhaustion. His color was perpetually gray, and he spent more time in his recliner than walking the floor of the facility. He looked like a man who was ready to put down a heavy weight, and naturally, my mother decided it was time to talk about who would pick it up. At Sunday dinners, Denise started dropping phrases that hung in the air like heavy smoke. She talked about stepping back. She talked about legacy. She talked about needing someone with fresh energy to carry the torch into the next decade. I sat there, cutting my roast beef, thinking about the new payroll software I had just implemented and the 98% occupancy rate I had maintained for 12 consecutive quarters. I assumed, foolishly, that the fresh energy was a metaphor for a new strategic plan I had been drafting. I was wrong. The exclusion began with the logistics, without looping me in. My parents invited Sophie home for what they called a serious talk. They didn't just ask her to drive down. They flew her in from the city, paying for a premium seat, and booked her a 2-week stay to ensure she could be involved in the transition. I found out she was coming when I saw the charge for the flight on the company credit card statement. I flagged it as a potential fraudulent charge. "Oh no," my father told me when I asked, avoiding my gaze. "That is just your sister. We need her here to get the lay of the land." Then came the silence. For years, my inbox had been the central nervous system of Evergreen Haven. Every vendor request, every state query, every complaint passed through me. But suddenly, there were gaps. I would walk into the break room and hear conversations stop. I would see emails from the state regarding our upcoming evaluation that did not have my name in the carbon copy line. Then, an architectural firm sent a large tube of blueprints to the office. I opened it, assuming it was the schematic for the new wing repairs I had requested. It was not. It was a glossy, full-color rendering for a brand refresh. The practical nurses' station was gone, replaced by a coffee bar with pendant lighting. The resident rehabilitation garden, which I had carefully designed with non-slip paths and sensory plants, was replaced by a sculptural water feature that looked like a liability lawsuit waiting to happen. I checked the date on the plans. They had been commissioned 3 weeks ago. I checked the project lead contact. It wasn't me. It was Sophie Ellison. The next day, I looked at the shared digital calendar. There, blocked out for Friday afternoon, was a meeting titled Succession Vision, Partners Only. I was not invited. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself they were just brainstorming. I told myself they valued my time too much to drag me into a marketing meeting. But the truth hit me on a Wednesday morning, delivered by a nurse named Carla who had been with us for 5 years. I was at the medication cart, double-checking a dosage for Mr. Henderson, when Carla leaned against the wall. She looked uncomfortable. "So," she said, keeping her voice low, "are you nervous?" I looked up. "Nervous about what? The state survey? We are ready for it." Carla shook her head. "No, about the new boss. Sophie?" I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "Sophie is just visiting. Carla?" "That is not what she said," Carla replied, glancing down the hall to make sure the coast was clear. "She was in here yesterday while you were at the bank. Your dad introduced her to the nursing staff. He said she is the future director. He said she is taking the reins starting next month." The floor seemed to tilt slightly under my feet. "He said that?" "Yeah," Carla said, looking at me with genuine sympathy. "She was talking about how she wants to change the uniforms. She wants us to wear polos instead of scrubs, because it looks more hospitality-focused. Nora, tell me I don't have to wear a polo shirt to change a colostomy bag. I forced a smile. It felt like the skin on my face was made of plaster. I will handle it. Carla, don't worry. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked like a woman who had spent 10 years keeping a sinking ship afloat, only to be thrown overboard the moment the waters calmed. I pulled out my phone. My mother had just posted a photo on Instagram. It was a picture of Sophie. She was standing in front of the Evergreen Haven sign, wearing a white blazer, looking powerful and visionary. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking off into the middle distance, as if contemplating the bright future she was about to build. The caption read, "Where she belongs, the future starts now. So proud to see our girl stepping up to lead." There were 40 comments congratulating the family. I was not tagged. I was not mentioned. I was completely erased from the narrative of the place I had saved. That night, I went to my parents' house for dinner. I had a key. Of course, I walked in through the garage. The house was quiet. My parents were already asleep. The television in the den was playing softly to an empty room. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. There, sitting in the center of the kitchen island, was a thick folder. It was labeled in Sophie's looping, artistic handwriting, "The New Era." It was not hidden. It was left out with the casual carelessness of people who do not fear consequences because they do not believe anyone would dare to challenge them. I opened it. The first few pages were mood boards, pictures of luxury hotels, spa lobbies, and young, happy people who were definitely not suffering from dementia. Then came the financial projections. I scanned the numbers. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't projections. They were fantasies. Sophie had projected a 30% revenue increase based on premium room upgrades that our current demographic could not afford. She had factored in income from a concierge service that didn't exist. But the expense side was where the horror truly lived. To pay for the rebranding, the water feature, and the marketing blitz, Sophie had outlined a cost reduction strategy. "Eliminate redundant administrative support," she had written. "Reduce night shift nursing aides to state minimums. Switch food service vendors to lower-tier provider." She was planning to gut the care standard to pay for the aesthetic. She was going to fire the staff I had trained. She was going to feed the residents processed slop so she could buy a neon sign. I turned to the back of the folder. There was a draft contract. It was an employment agreement for Sophie Ellison. Title: Executive Director of Vision and Strategy. Starting salary: $150,000 a year. Benefits: full health, company lease car, 4 weeks vacation. I was currently making $55,000 a year as the assistant manager. I flipped the pages frantically, looking for my name, looking for director of operations, looking for consultant, looking for anything that acknowledged my existence. My name was nowhere. I heard footsteps. Mark shuffled into the kitchen, wearing his bathrobe. He looked startled to see me. "Nora, I didn't hear you come in." I looked at him. My hand was resting on the contract. "Dad," I said. My voice was very quiet. "What is this?" He looked at the folder. He winced, rubbing the back of his neck. "Ah, you weren't supposed to see that yet. We were going to present it to you on Sunday." "Present what?" I asked. "That Sophie is firing the night staff? That she is taking a salary 3 times what I make? That she is the director?" Mark sighed, walking over to the fridge to get a bottle of milk. "Look, honey, don't get hung up on the numbers. Sophie is an artist. She thinks big. Those are just ideas." "These aren't ideas. Dad, this is a contract. You are giving her the business." "I am giving her the helm," Mark corrected. "She needs the title to build credibility. She is good at the public side of things. Nora, she shines. You know she shines." "And what about me?" I asked. "What about the last 10 years? What about the flu outbreak? What about the compliance rating?" "You are vital," Mark insisted. Closing the fridge door. "God, Nora, you are the backbone. But let Sophie try this. Let her have her moment. You can still help with the boring parts, kiddo. You are so good at the details. Sophie needs you to handle the compliance and the staffing so she can focus on the growth. It is a partnership. A partnership, I repeated. Where she gets the title, the money, and the credit, and I get to fire the nurses she can't afford? Don't be dramatic, he snapped, his guilt turning into defensiveness. You are sisters. You help each other. Denise walked in then. She had heard voices. She tightened her silk robe around herself, assessing the situation instantly. She saw the folder. She saw my face. She didn't try to soothe me. She went straight for the jugular. Nora, she said, her voice sharp, stop upsetting your father. His heart can't take this. I am upsetting him? I asked, incredulous. You are handing the business to someone who thinks Medicare is a skincare brand. Sophie has vision, Denise said firmly, and let us be honest with each other for once. Nora, you are wonderful. You are a hard worker, but you are just not front-facing material. The words hung in the air. Front-facing material. What does that mean? I whispered. It means you are shy, Denise said, waving her hand as if dismissing a fly. You are awkward with the donors. You don't like the spotlight. You know how you are. You are happier in the back office. We are just playing to your strengths. You will always have a place here behind the scenes. We would never leave you out. But Sophie looks like a director. It was the final piece of the puzzle. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter that I saved lives. It didn't matter that I was the only reason they weren't bankrupt. To them, I was the mechanic. Sophie was the race car driver. And you don't put the mechanic on the podium. I see, I said. The calmness that washed over me was terrifying. It wasn't the heat of anger. It was the absolute zero of indifference. I am going to go home, I said. Good, Denise said, softening now that she thought she had won. Get some sleep. We will talk about the transition timeline on Sunday. We are going to make this work for everyone. I walked out of the kitchen. I heard them murmuring to each other, reassuring themselves that I would get over it, that I would fall in line like I always did. But I didn't go to my car. I waited in the hallway until I heard their bedroom door click shut. Then I walked back into the kitchen. The dishwasher was humming, a low, rhythmic thrumming sound. The folder was still on the counter where Mark had left it. I did not cry. My hands did not shake. I took out my phone. I opened the folder. I photographed the mood board. I photographed the revenue projections. I photographed the page outlining the staff cuts. I photographed the contract, zooming in on the salary figure and the title. I photographed the signature line where my father had already penciled in his approval. I took 24 photos in total, every page, every betrayal, every piece of evidence that proved they were about to drive Evergreen Haven off a cliff. I saved them to the cloud. I saved them to a hidden folder on my phone. Then I closed the physical folder and placed it back exactly where it had been, lining it up with the edge of the granite counter. I walked out of the house into the cool night air. I looked up at the stars. I felt lighter than I had in years. They thought they had put me in my place, behind the scenes. They forgot that the person behind the scenes is the one who controls the lights, the sound, and the trapdoors. And I was about to pull the lever. I did not go to a lawyer first. I went to the only person in Riverton who cared about the residents of Evergreen Haven as much as I did. Dr. Elias Mercer was 72 years old, a geriatrician with a spine of steel and eyes that had seen everything from the polio epidemic to the rise of for-profit healthcare chains. He had been the medical director for our facility for 15 years, a position that was technically contracted but felt spiritual. He was the one who had watched me grow from a child pushing a wheelchair to the woman running the quarantine unit. I sat in his small, book-lined office 3 days after finding the folder in my parents' kitchen. The air smelled of old paper and peppermint tea. I laid it all out for him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream about fairness. I simply showed him the photographs on my phone, the budget cuts Sophie was planning, the reduction in nursing staff, the shift to a cheaper food vendor, and the terrifying lack of understanding regarding state regulations. She thinks she can cut the night shift ratio to the state minimum to pay for a water feature, I said, my voice steady. She thinks dementia care is about aesthetics. If she takes over next month, Dr. Mercer, we will have a sentinel event within 90 days. Someone will fall. Someone will wander off. Someone will die. Doctor, Mercer looked at the photos for a long time. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Your father, he said, choosing his words carefully, is a good man who is blinded by the sun. He looks at Sophie and sees a reflection of who he wishes he was. He looks at you and sees the machinery that keeps the lights on. He does not understand that without the machinery, the house is just a dark box. I can't let them do it, I said. I can't let them gut the place. This isn't about revenge, Nora, he said, looking me dead in the eye. If you do this just to hurt them, you will lose yourself. You have to do this to protect the people everyone else is pretending to care about. Mrs. Gable in room 3, Mr. Henderson, the staff who trust you. He wrote a name on a prescription pad and slid it across the desk. Alicia Cortez, he said. She specializes in nonprofit structures and elder care liability. She is expensive, she is brilliant, and she hates bullies. Alicia Cortez did not look like the kind of lawyer my father would hire. My father liked lawyers who wore expensive suits and told him he was a genius. Alicia wore a simple gray blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her office was completely devoid of decor except for a whiteboard and a coffee machine. She listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. She read the power of attorney document I had retrieved from the fireproof box. She studied the photos of Sophie's vision. Finally, she capped her pen and looked at me. Your parents think they own a business, she said. But they don't. They own real estate. They own 2 buildings with a mortgage and some furniture. That is the hardware. But the software? The thing that makes it a business? The state licenses, the operational protocols, the reputation with the hospitals, the digital tracking systems you built? That is the software. And right now, according to this power of attorney, you control the software. She stood up and walked to the whiteboard. We are going to create a separation, she explained, drawing a square and a circle. The square is the real estate. Your parents keep that. They can have the debt and the bricks. The circle is the care system, the intellectual property, the operating model. We are going to move that into a new entity. A new company? I asked. A nonprofit, she corrected. We will call it the Northline Care Trust. Its mission is to ensure quality standards for seniors. Using your authority as the designated agent for business restructuring, which your father signed over to you during the flu crisis, you are going to license the Evergreen Haven operational system to Northline. She turned to me, her eyes sharp. Here is the key. Nora, the physical facility, the building your parents own, will operate as a client of Northline. They will use Northline's protocols, Northline's brand, and Northline's staffing models. In exchange, they get to keep their license, but the agreement will have a trigger clause. A trigger clause? If standards fall below the metrics you set, Alicia said, Northline revokes the license. If they fire essential staff, Northline revokes the license. If they try to cut food quality, Northline revokes the license. And if the license is revoked, the state shuts them down, and Northline has the immediate right to relocate the residents to partner facilities. I sat back in my chair. It was brilliant. It was a poison pill wrapped in a safety blanket. So, I said slowly, Sophie can have the title. She can have the office. But if she tries to change anything that matters, the system rejects her, Alicia finished. She will be a captain of a ship where the steering wheel is controlled by you. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the dutiful, invisible daughter. I nodded when my mother talked about the flower arrangements for the welcome brunch. I smiled when my father made jokes about how easy my life was about to get once Sophie took over. I even helped Sophie set up her new email signature, watching her type executive director with a flourish. By night, I was dismantling their absolute control. I met with Alicia every evening. We drafted hundreds of pages of documents. Using the power of attorney, I formally transferred the ownership of the Evergreen Haven service model, every checklist, every safety protocol, the employee handbook I had written, and even the trademark for the name itself, into the Northline Care Trust. I wasn't stealing the business. I was copywriting the competence. I transferred the vendor contracts to the trust to ensure the prices stayed locked in. I moved the digital server access to the trust. I ensured that the nursing staff's employment contracts were updated so that their benefits were guaranteed by the trust's endowment, protecting them from Sophie's proposed cuts. The hardest part was the timeline. We had to get everything signed before Sophie officially took the helm on the 1st of the month. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before the big legacy dinner, I walked into my father's office. He was putting golf balls into a cup, looking bored. My mother was sitting on the sofa, looking at fabric swatches for Sophie's office curtains. "Hey, Dad," I said, holding a stack of files. Alicia, the compliance attorney, sent over the modernization paperwork. It is the stuff for the liability insurance and the risk protection we talked about. Mark groaned. "More paperwork? God. Nora, can't we wait until next week?" "We can't," I said, putting the stack on his desk. "The insurance renewal is due Friday. If we don't sign these, the premiums go up by 20%. Plus, this protects us if a resident sues. It separates the operational risk from the property assets. It is just smart housekeeping." I used the words I knew would work: insurance premiums, lawsuits, housekeeping. Mark picked up a pen. "You read it?" "Cover to cover," I lied. I had not only read it, I had written it. "Is it standard?" he asked, flipping to the signature page of the first document, completely ignoring the header that read, "Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement." "Completely standard," I said. "It just codifies what we are already doing." "Okay," Mark said. He signed his name with a flourish. Mark Ellison. He handed the pen to Denise. "You need to sign as co-owner. D." Denise sighed, putting down her fabric swatches. "I don't know why this has to be so complicated. Sophie is going to hate all this red tape." "That is why I am handling it now," I said softly. "So she starts with a clean slate. She won't have to worry about the legal structure at all." "See?" Denise said to Mark, signing her name. "Nora is so good at the boring stuff. It frees Sophie up to be the face." They signed everything. They signed the transfer of the brand. They signed the operational license agreement. They signed the exclusivity contract with Northline Care Trust. They signed the clause that stated the director of operations, me, could not be terminated without cause and approval from the trust board. They signed away their autonomy in 10 minutes, desperate to get back to planning the party. "Thanks, kiddo," Mark said, pushing the stack back to me. "You act like you enjoy this stuff. You are a lifesaver. Now, get these filed so we can focus on the big night." I took the stack. The papers felt heavy in my hands, hot with potential energy. "You are welcome," I said. "I will file them immediately." I drove straight to the courthouse. The county clerk was a woman named Brenda, who had processed my filings for years. She knew me. She didn't ask questions. She stamped the documents with a heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud that sounded like a heartbeat. "New entity?" she asked, glancing at the Northline Care Trust Articles of Incorporation. "New beginning," I corrected. I walked out of the courthouse an hour later. It was late afternoon. The sky was a flat, slate gray, threatening rain. The air was cool against my skin. I stood on the concrete steps and looked out at the town of Riverton. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a servant. I didn't feel like the second choice. I felt like the architect. My parents still owned the building. Sophie would still get her party, but the soul of the place, the thing that actually mattered, was mine. And if they wanted to keep it, they would have to play by my rules. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from my mother. "All done with the legal junk? Don't forget to pick up the pastries for Sophie's welcome brunch tomorrow morning. Get the expensive ones from the French place, not the grocery store. We want everything perfect for her." I looked at the message. Then I looked at the file folder in my hand, which contained the legal instruments that had just turned their empire into a tenant of my creation. I didn't type a reply. I just slid the phone back into my pocket. "Don't worry, Mom," I whispered to the empty parking lot. "Everything is going to be exactly perfect." I walked to my car, tossed the folder onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The pastries could wait. I had a legacy to secure. The week leading up to the legacy night dinner felt like the heavy, humid silence before a thunderstorm breaks. The atmosphere inside Evergreen Haven was strange. A mix of forced celebration and quiet anxiety. My parents had officially introduced Sophie to the staff as the incoming executive director, framing it as a benevolent changing of the guard. "Nora finally gets a break," my father told the day shift nurses, clapping his hands together as if he were delivering good news. "She has been holding the fort for so long. Now she can finally relax while her sister takes the reins." The nurses, women I had hired and trained, women who had stood beside me during the flu outbreak and the budget cuts, smiled politely, but their eyes did not smile. They looked at Sophie, then they looked at me. Confusion and concern etched into their expressions. They remained professional, greeting Sophie with enthusiastic nods, but there was a distance there. They answered her questions, but they brought their problems to me. Sophie didn't notice the difference. She was too busy playing the part of the visionary. She strolled through the hallways, wearing a series of brand-new, sharp-shouldered blazers that she had bought specifically for her executive era. She walked not like a healthcare administrator, but like a real estate developer inspecting a teardown. I followed 3 paces behind her, holding a clipboard, checking staffing ratios, and signing off on dietary restriction updates. "The energy in here is just so beige," Sophie said. Stopping in the middle of the B-wing corridor, she swept her hand dramatically toward the walls, which were painted a calming neutral cream designed to be soothing for residents with visual processing issues. "It is depressing," she continued, wrinkling her nose. "We need a branding moment here. Maybe a neon sign that says 'Good Vibes Only' in pink script. And we should paint this wall a deep, moody emerald. It would look amazing on the website." "Emerald green is too dark for the residents." "Sophie," I said quietly, not looking up from my chart. "It creates shadows. Shadows confuse dementia patients. They think they are holes in the wall." Sophie sighed, the sound of someone burdened by the small-mindedness of others. "You are so literal. Nora, it is about the aesthetic. We need to attract the modern family. Oh, and we should rip out the nurses' station in the lobby, put in a coffee bar, an espresso machine, maybe some artisanal pastries. Make it feel like a boutique hotel." "The nurses' station is there so we can monitor the front door and the medication cart simultaneously," I replied. "Details," she waved a hand. "We can figure that out later. I just want to focus on the experience." Behind us, Mrs. Kowalski was sitting in her wheelchair near the window. Mrs. Kowalski was 89, sharp as a tack, and had zero tolerance for nonsense. She had been a resident for 4 years. Sophie spotted her and immediately turned on the charm. She crouched down, her blazer straining slightly, flashing a bright, camera-ready smile. "Hello there," Sophie beamed, pitching her voice up an octave. "I am Sophie. I am going to be taking care of you soon. Isn't that exciting?" Mrs. Kowalski peered at her through thick glasses. She looked at Sophie's perfect blowout, then at her manicured nails. Then she looked past Sophie, directly at me. "You are the pretty one from the pictures in the lobby," Mrs. Kowalski said to Sophie. It wasn't a compliment. It was a categorization. Sophie preened anyway. "Well, thank you." "But," Mrs. Kowalski continued, reaching out a trembling hand toward me, "Nora is still the boss, right? She is the one who knows how to fix the thermostat." Sophie's smile faltered. Her jaw tightened. She stood up, brushing imaginary dust off her knees. "Nora is going to be taking a well-deserved rest," Sophie said, her voice tight. "I will be the boss, but I'm sure I can figure out a thermostat. Mrs. Kowalski didn't look convinced. She just patted my hand. You stay close, honey. We don't want any trouble. Sophie turned and walked away quickly, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. I stayed behind for a moment to squeeze Mrs. Kowalski's hand. Don't worry, I whispered. I have made sure everything is going to be fine. Denise was obsessed with the legacy night dinner. It was going to be the social event of the season for Riverton's small circle of elites. She had spent weeks designing the invitations and the menus. I walked into the dining room one evening to find the table covered in proofs. Denise held up a menu card, gold foil on heavy navy cardstock. Look at this, Nora, she said, glowing. Isn't it regal? The front of the menu featured a professional headshot of Sophie, looking commanding and thoughtful. Underneath, in large, elegant script, it read, Sophie Ellison, the next generation of care. I scanned the rest of the card. It listed the courses: filet mignon, roasted asparagus, truffle mash. At the very bottom, in font size 8, was a single line. Special thanks to Nora Ellison for her support. It is beautiful, Mom, I said, my voice flat. I wanted to make sure everyone knows this is a celebration of the future, Denise said, oblivious to the knife she was twisting. We are launching Sophie. It has to be perfect. In the living room, Mark was practicing his speech. He stood in front of the mirror, holding a glass of scotch, rehearsing the lines he would deliver to the room full of bankers and politicians. It takes a special kind of courage to come home, he intoned, watching himself in the glass. To leave behind the bright lights of the city and choose family. To sacrifice personal ambition for the greater good. That is who Sophie is. She chose us. I stood in the doorway, listening. I thought about the 10 years I had lived down the street. I thought about the nights I had slept on a cot during the flu outbreak. I thought about the dates I had canceled, the vacations I had skipped, the silent, grinding sacrifice of my entire 20s. He didn't see any of that as sacrifice. He saw it as duty, because I was the plain one, the quiet one. My labor was expected. Sophie's presence was a gift. Sounds great, Dad, I said. Mark jumped, spilling a drop of scotch. Oh, Nora, didn't see you there. Yeah, I think it hits the right emotional notes. We want people to cry a little, right? They will definitely be crying, I said. That night, I went back to the facility office. It was late, past 11. The building was quiet, settled into the rhythmic breathing of sleep. I sat at my desk and finalized the last internal policies for the Northline Care Trust. I reviewed the continuity of care clause one last time. It was the failsafe. It stated that if the Evergreen Haven facility ever lost its operational license, due to, say, a failure to meet the trust's standards, the trust was legally obligated to offer every single resident immediate placement at one of 3 partner facilities in the county, with moving costs covered by the trust's endowment. I had negotiated those partnerships quietly over the last month. I had ensured that if Sophie crashed the ship, the passengers would have lifeboats. My revenge was targeted at the captain, not the cargo. Satisfied, I closed the laptop. I opened a drawer and took out a single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery. I uncapped my pen. I needed to write a letter, not to my father, not to my mother. They were lost causes, blinded by their own narrative. I needed to write to Sophie. I needed to tell her the truth, because no one else would. My parents were handing her a fantasy. I was about to hand her reality. I wrote steadily, my hand moving across the page without hesitation. Sophie, by the time you read this, the speeches will be over. Dad will have called you the future. Mom will have told everyone you are the leader we have been waiting for. You probably believe them. I am not writing this to be cruel. I am writing this because they haven't told you the truth, and you need to know what you are actually holding. You think you are inheriting a thriving business. You are not. You are inheriting a staggering amount of debt. Mom and Dad refinanced the buildings 3 times in the last 5 years to pay for your apartment in the city, your car, and the lifestyle they wanted you to have. The mortgage payments are $18,000 a month. The facility breaks even only because we run at 98% capacity and because I did the work of 3 people for the salary of 1. That ends tonight. The boring legal paperwork you didn't want to read? That was the transfer of the entire operating system to a separate nonprofit, the Northline Care Trust. I control that trust. The buildings belong to Mom and Dad, but the right to run them as a care facility belongs to Northline. You are now the executive director. That means you have to meet the standards I set. If you cut staff below the ratios in the handbook, you lose the license. If you change the food vendors to cheaper options, you lose the license. If you fail a state inspection, you lose the license. You wanted the title. You wanted the spotlight. You have them. But titles don't pay the mortgage, and spotlights don't clean bedpans. You have a choice now. You can learn how to actually do this job. I have left manuals, and the trust will provide training if you are humble enough to take it, or you can walk away. But you cannot fake it anymore. There is no one left to cover for you. Welcome home. Nora. I read it over. It was cold. It was factual. It was fair. I folded the letter into thirds. I placed it inside a pale cream envelope and sealed it. On the corner of my desk sat a thick, leather-bound binder embossed with gold letters. Sophie Ellison. Succession plan. It was a prop my father had made for the ceremony, filled with blank pages and generic mission statements, something for her to hold while she waved to the crowd. I slid the envelope between the first 2 pages of the binder. I stood up and turned off the desk lamp. The office plunged into darkness, lit only by the street lamp outside. I caught my reflection in the window glass. For years, when I looked at myself, I saw a girl who was waiting for permission. I saw a girl who hoped that if she worked hard enough, someone would finally say thank you. That girl was gone. The woman in the reflection was not waiting for anything. She was tired, yes, but she was solid. She was the one who had built the engine, and she was the one who held the kill switch. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the bakery confirming the pastry order for the morning. I didn't answer it. I walked out of the office and locked the door behind me. The key felt cool and heavy in my hand. I wasn't just locking a door. I was sealing a tomb, and tomorrow night, I would hand my sister the shovel. The private dining room of the Riverton Chop House filled up with a specific kind of heavy, polite energy. It was the sound of 25 people trying to balance the noise of their silverware against the volume of their small talk. The air grew warm and thick, smelling of roasted garlic, red wine, and the expensive perfume my mother had sprayed liberally around the room before the doors opened. I sat at the end of the table, watching the guests arrive. These were not strangers. These were the people who made the healthcare ecosystem of our county function. There was Mrs. Gable, the state inspector who had once pitied me during the flu outbreak. There was Sarah, the discharge coordinator from Riverton General, who had me on speed dial. There were 3 members of the town council and the children of some of our wealthiest long-term residents. They greeted me with warm, genuine smiles. Sarah even squeezed my shoulder as she passed, whispering that she had a complicated admission coming up next week and needed my eyes on the file. I just nodded. She didn't know yet that by next week, I wouldn't be the one reading the files. My mother, Denise, was in her element. She floated from cluster to cluster, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. She was rewriting history in real time, one conversation at a time. I heard her voice drift over the clinking of glasses as she leaned in to speak to the mayor's wife. "We are just so relieved Sophie finally agreed to come home," Denise said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be overheard. She gave up such a glamorous life in the city for her roots, a huge career, but she knew we needed her. That is just the kind of girl she is. The mayor's wife nodded sympathetically. "And Nora? What will she do?" "Oh, Nora." Denise laughed. A light, tinkling sound. "Nora has been wonderful. She kept the seat warm for Sophie. She really held the fort until her sister was ready to lead. Now Nora can finally take a step back and just breathe. We are giving her a break." Kept the seat warm. I took a sip of water. The ice was cold against my teeth. That was what my decade of 16-hour days, missed weddings, and sleeping on a cot in a storage closet amounted to, I was a space heater. I was a placeholder. At the head of the table, my father was holding court. He had Sophie tucked under his arm like a prize poodle. Sophie was glowing. She was drinking champagne faster than she should have. Her cheeks flushed, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny. "Look at her," Mark boomed to a group of investors. "The prodigal daughter returns. We are putting the empire in good hands." He reached under the table and pulled out the ceremonial binder. It was the one I had seen on his desk the night before. The thick leather cover was embossed with gold letters. Sophie Ellison, Succession Plan. He held it up like Moses holding the tablets. "This," Mark announced, drawing the room's attention, "is the roadmap to the empire. Everything you need to know about taking Evergreen Haven into the next century is right in here." There was a round of polite applause. A man from the bank chuckled. "Don't scare her off with too much paperwork. Mark, let the girl enjoy her champagne first." Sophie rolled her eyes playfully, accepting the heavy binder. She didn't open it. She just held it to her chest, posing as a friend snapped a photo for Instagram. "Don't worry," Sophie chirped, her voice bright and brittle. "I am going to leave the nerdy stuff to Nora. She loves all that compliance drama. I am here for the vision. We need to focus on the big picture, right?" She looked down the table at me and winked. Several guests laughed. It was a comfortable, easy sound for them. They didn't realize that she had just publicly admitted she had no intention of doing the actual work. They thought it was humility. I knew it was a confession. I sat perfectly still. My hands were resting on my own folder, the thin navy blue leather folio that contained the signed Northline Care Trust agreements and the summary Alicia Cortez had prepared. The contrast was almost funny. Sophie was holding a heavy binder full of blank pages and platitudes, unaware that inside it lay a letter that would dismantle her life. I was holding a thin folder that weighed nothing but contained the legal gravity of a black hole. The door to the private room opened quietly. Dr. Elias Mercer slipped in. He was late, which was unlike him. He wore his old tweed jacket, looking out of place among the tailored suits and cocktail dresses. Behind him walked a woman with severe hair and a gray blazer. Alicia Cortez. No one looked at her twice. They assumed she was Dr. Mercer's wife, or perhaps a colleague. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She scanned the room, saw the empty seats near the back corner, and moved toward them with the efficiency of a predator. Dr. Mercer caught my eye from across the room. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he sat down, folded his hands over his cane, and waited. The waiters began to clear the main course. The clatter of china receded, replaced by the expectant silence that comes before speeches. Mark stood up. He tapped his spoon against his glass. The sound was sharp, cutting through the low hum of conversation. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began. His face was flushed with wine and pride. "Tonight is a special night. It is a night Denise and I have dreamed about since we opened the doors of Evergreen Haven 30 years ago." He looked down at Sophie, his eyes shining with tears. "Building a business is hard," he said, "but building a legacy is harder. You build it hoping that one day you will have someone to pass it to, someone who understands the soul of what you created." I watched him. I waited for him to look at me. Just once. Just a glance to acknowledge the person who had actually kept the business alive so he could have a legacy to pass. He never looked. His eyes were locked on Sophie. "We are so blessed," Mark continued, his voice thickening. "We have 2 wonderful daughters, but tonight we celebrate the one who chose to come back. Sophie, you could have gone anywhere. You had the world at your feet, but you chose family. You chose us, and that is why we chose you to lead us into the future." The words hit me like physical blows. Chosen meant for more. He was saying it out loud. The quiet dynamic of my childhood was now the public declaration of my adulthood. I was the default option. Sophie was the choice. "To Sophie," Mark toasted, raising his glass high. "The face of the brand, the future." "To you, Sophie," the room echoed. Denise stood up next. She didn't use a glass. She used her hands, pressing them to her heart as if she were physically containing her emotions. "I just want to add one thing," she said, her voice trembling. "As parents, we have to make hard choices. We have to know our children better than they know themselves." She finally looked at me. It wasn't a look of malice. It was a look of condescending affection. "Nora," she said, addressing me in front of everyone, "we are so proud of you. You are such a worker. You are just like a little soldier. But we know that leadership is a heavy burden. Some kids are just built to handle that kind of pressure, and some are built to support. We wanted to protect you from that weight. We wanted to let you be you." The room murmured with approval. They thought it was sweet. They heard a mother protecting her shy daughter. I heard a mother telling her competent daughter that she was genetically inferior to her incompetent sister. She was framing my exclusion as an act of mercy. She was rewriting my competence as a limitation. She was saying that I wasn't the CEO because I wasn't strong enough, not because they were too blind to see me. "We love you both," Denise finished, blowing a kiss to Sophie. "But tonight, the torch passes. Sophie, my darling, it is all yours." The applause was loud this time, genuine. People were moved by the performance. Sophie stood up, beaming, holding the heavy binder to her chest, basking in the adoration she believed she deserved. The applause began to fade. The waiter stepped forward to pour the coffee. Mark sat down, looking exhausted but triumphant. It was time. I didn't slam my hand on the table. I didn't throw a glass. I simply stood up. I smoothed the front of my black dress. I picked up the cream envelope and the leather folder from the table. The movement was small, but because I had been so still for the entire evening, it drew the eye. Mrs. Gable looked at me. Sarah from the hospital looked at me. "Nora?" Mark asked, half rising from his chair. "Honey, we aren't doing toasts from the floor. Sit down." The room went quiet, not the respectful silence of a speech, but the confused silence of a disruption. I looked at my father, then I looked at my mother. Finally, I looked at Sophie, who was still smiling, though the edges of her mouth were starting to twitch with annoyance. "There is one more thing," I said. My voice was soft. I didn't project it like an actor. I spoke with the flat, calm authority of someone who is used to giving bad news to families in hospital waiting rooms. "There is one more thing Sophie needs before any of this can be real." I walked around the table. The sound of my heels on the carpet was the only noise in the world. I stopped behind my father's chair. I looked at the binder in Sophie's arms. "You should open that," I said. "And you should read the letter inside." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The guests looked at one another, sensing that the play had gone off script. "Doctor," Mercer leaned forward in his chair. Alicia Cortez uncapped a pen. Sophie looked down at the binder, then up at me. "What? Nora, stop being weird." "It is not weird," I said, sliding my own folder onto the table in front of my father. "It is business, and we are all about business tonight, aren't we?" I waited. The trap was set. The leverage was applied. All that was left was for the chosen daughter to turn the page. The room had gone quiet, but it was not the respectful silence of an audience waiting for an encore. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum just before the seal breaks. I stood there, my hand hovering over the cream envelope I had placed on the white linen tablecloth. Sophie looked at it, then at me, her expression a mix of annoyance and pity. She clearly thought this was some desperate, last-minute attempt by her big sister to insert herself into the narrative. Perhaps a sentimental list of advice from the trenches, or a passive-aggressive checklist of door codes. "This is yours," I said again, my voice steady enough to cut through the low hum of the air conditioning. "You should read it first." Sophie sighed, a theatrical exhale that shook her shoulders. She handed the heavy ceremonial binder to my father, who took it automatically, looking confused. "Fine," Sophie said, snatching the envelope. "If it will make you sit down and stop ruining the vibe, what is it? A poem?" She tore the seal. The sound of the thick paper ripping was sharp, like a bone snapping. She pulled out the documents. There were 5 pages, stapled neatly in the top left corner. The cover page was not a letter. It was a summary of assets and liabilities, formatted in a crisp, uncompromising table. Sophie's eyes scanned the top of the page. She blinked. She looked closer. Northline Care Trust? She read aloud, her voice flat. What is Northline Care Trust? Keep reading, I said. She flipped the page. I watched her eyes move. I knew exactly what she was seeing because I had written every word of it. Paragraph 1 detailed the intellectual property transfer. It explained that the Evergreen Haven service model, the proprietary system of care, the digital tracking software, the safety protocols, the staff training manuals, and the brand name itself was the sole property of the Northline Care Trust. Paragraph 2 explained the licensing agreement. It stated that the physical buildings located at 405 and 407 Oak Street, currently owned by Mark and Denise Ellison, were granted a revocable license to operate as Evergreen Haven, only so long as they remained in full compliance with the Trust's standards. Sophie's brow furrowed. She looked up, a flicker of genuine confusion cracking her mask. I don't get it, she said, looking at Mark. Dad, this says we don't own the name. It says we are tenants of a system? Mark frowned. Don't be silly. Honey, of course we own the name. I built the name. Read page 3. Sophie, I said. She flipped to page 3. This was the page that usually made people stop breathing. It was the financial disclosure. It listed the assets she was inheriting. 2 aging buildings with roofs that needed replacing within 5 years. And then, it listed the liabilities. I saw the color drain from Sophie's face. It started at her hairline and washed down her neck, leaving her looking gray and sick under the expensive recessed lighting. 3 mortgages? She whispered. The room was dead silent now. The guests, the bankers, the politicians, the hospital administrators were leaning forward. They smelled blood. What? Mark asked, his voice rising in pitch. There are 3 mortgages on the property, Sophie said, her voice trembling. Totaling $2.4 million? She looked up at our parents, her eyes wide with betrayal. You told me the business was debt-free. You told me it was a cash cow. It was, I interjected calmly, until Mom and Dad refinanced the buildings 3 times in the last 6 years. Where do you think the money for your loft in Lakeview came from, Sophie? Where did the money for your media startup come from? Where did the money for the Range Rover come from? I gestured to the paper in her hand. They stripped the equity out of the buildings to fund your lifestyle, I said, and now you are inheriting the shell. Those buildings have a debt service of $18,000 a month. That is your overhead before you pay a single nurse or buy a single gallon of milk. Sophie looked back at the document. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled audibly. She flipped to the summary table at the end. She read the bottom line. She was inheriting a title. She was inheriting a mountain of debt. And she was inheriting a facility that she could not legally run without the permission of a trust she did not control. She stood up so abruptly her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the carpet. You are joking, she screamed. It was the scream I had been waiting for. It wasn't the scream of a victim. It was the scream of a child who opens a beautifully wrapped box and finds it empty. You are joking, she yelled again, looking wildly between me and our parents. Tell me this is a joke. This says I get the buildings and the debt and nothing works without her. She jabbed a finger at me. It says I can't even change the paint color without approval because it violates the sensory care protocol. It says I can't fire the night staff. It says I don't own the patient lists. Mark lunged forward and snatched the papers from Sophie's hand. Denise grabbed his arm, reading over his shoulder. That is impossible, Mark sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. I never signed this. I never agreed to this. Look at the dates, Dad, I said. Look at the signatures. Mark flipped to the back of the packet. He saw his own signature, Bold and looping, Mark Ellison, dated 3 years ago during the flu crisis, and then again, on the modernization paperwork he had signed just yesterday, trusting me to handle the boring fine print. He stared at his own handwriting. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see his helper. He saw his executioner. "You," he choked out. "You tricked me. You made me sign away the company." "I didn't make you do anything," I said. "I gave you documents to protect the care standards. You signed them because you didn't care enough to read them. You were too busy planning the party." "This is illegal!" Denise shrieked, her poise finally shattering. "You can't do this to your family. You can't steal our business." "She didn't steal it," a voice said from the back of the room. It was a cool, sharp voice that cut through the hysteria like a scalpel. Alicia Cortez stood up. She smoothed her gray blazer and walked toward the table. She didn't look like a party guest anymore. She looked like a shark entering a wading pool. "Who are you?" Mark demanded. "My name is Alicia Cortez," she said, placing a business card on the table next to the centerpiece. "I am the General Counsel for the Northline Care Trust, and I can assure you, Mr. Ellison, that every transfer was executed legally under the durable power of attorney you granted to Nora Ellison 3 years ago." "I revoked that," Mark lied, panic making him sloppy. "No, you didn't," Alicia said calmly. "You forgot about it, and yesterday, you reaffirmed the structure when you signed the licensing agreement. It is watertight." The guests were paralyzed. This was not just a family drama. This was a corporate coup taking place over filet mignon. Alicia looked at Sophie, who was hyperventilating, clutching the edge of the table. "Ms. Ellison," Alicia said to Sophie, "I suggest you read the termination clause on page 4. It is quite important." Sophie didn't move, so Alicia recited it from memory, her voice projecting to the entire room. "If the operational standards of the facility fall below the metrics established by the trust, specifically regarding staffing ratios, hygiene, and patient safety, the trust has the right to revoke the operating license with 60 days' notice." Alicia paused to let that sink in. "Furthermore," she continued, looking directly at the state officials in the room, "if the license is revoked, the trust is contractually obligated to offer immediate relocation to all residents. We have secured agreements with 3 partner facilities in the county. We have the buses on retainer. If you fail to run this place correctly, Sophie, the trust will move the residents to safety, and you will be left with 2 empty buildings and a $2 million debt." The silence that followed was absolute. This was the trap door. I hadn't just taken the power, I had weaponized the responsibility. If I had simply stolen the money, I would be the villain. But I hadn't touched the money. I had secured the care. I had made it impossible for them to sacrifice the residents' well-being for their own profit. I watched the realization hit the room. Mrs. Gable, the state inspector, was nodding slowly. She understood. She saw exactly what I had done. I had built a fail-safe for the elderly people she was sworn to protect. Sophie looked at the summary table again. Her hands were trembling. "So," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I am the boss, but I have to do everything you say, or else I lose everything." "You are the executive director," I corrected gently. "You have the title you wanted. You have the office. You have the spotlight. But yes, the trust sets the standards. You just have to meet them." I leaned forward slightly. "You wanted to run the business. Sophie, the letter just explains what the business actually is. It is not a stage for your brand. It is a place where human beings live and die. And now, for the first time in your life, you are actually accountable for them." Sophie looked at her parents. Mark was slumped in his chair, defeated by his own signature. Denise was weeping softly into her napkin, mourning the loss of the fantasy. Then Sophie looked at me. "You hate me," she whispered. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. If I hated you, I would have let you take over without the trust. I would have let you fire the staff. I would have let you default on the loans. I would have let you destroy yourself and everyone in that building." I stood up straighter. "I don't hate you. Sophie, I just don't trust you. And now, I don't have to. I turned to the room. The guests were staring at me with a mixture of shock and awe. They had come to watch a coronation, and they had witnessed a revolution. Enjoy the dessert, I said. The chocolate tart is excellent. I ordered it myself. I picked up my purse. I didn't look back at my father. I didn't look back at the sister who was staring at the debt column like it was a death sentence. I signaled to Alicia. We walked toward the door together. Behind us, the illusion of the Ellison family legacy lay in pieces on the floor, mixed with the spilled champagne. But I knew that back at Evergreen Haven, the night shift was starting. The nurses were checking vitals. The residents were sleeping safely. The system was holding. And that was the only legacy I cared about. The private dining room of the Riverton Chop House had dissolved into chaos. But it was a contained, terrifying kind of chaos. It was the sound of a family myth shattering against the hard rock of legal reality. My father, Mark, was the first to find his voice, though it was shaking with a rage I had rarely seen directed at anyone but a state auditor. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "You betrayed us," he sputtered, his face a blotchy map of red and gray. "I trusted you. I gave you that power of attorney to help us during a crisis, not to hijack my life's work. You stole the business right out from under me." "Mr. Ellison, please be precise," Alicia Cortez interjected. Her voice was cool, a bucket of ice water on a grease fire. "Nora did not steal the business. She separated the assets. She firewalled the clinical operations from the financial mismanagement. If she had wanted to steal the business, she would have let you default on the loans and bought the buildings at auction. Instead, she created a safety net." "I don't care about safety nets," Mark shouted, creating a scene that made the mayor's wife recoil in her seat. "I care about loyalty. I care about my daughter respecting her father. And I care about the 38 residents sleeping in your facility tonight," Dr. Elias Mercer said. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried more weight than my father's shouting. He remained seated, his hands folded over his cane, looking at my parents with profound disappointment. "Mark, Denise," Dr. Mercer continued, "you are treating these people's lives like they are props in a family vanity project. You wanted to give Sophie a kingdom to rule, but you forgot that the kingdom is made of flesh and blood. Nora did not. Nora is the only reason you still have a license to operate." My mother, Denise, turned to me. The tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her mascara. She reached across the table, her hands grasping at the air near my arm. "Nora, please," she begged, her voice high and thin. "Just undo it. Just tear up the papers. We can fix this. We can find another way. Family should come before paperwork. How can you do this to your sister on her big night?" I looked at her. For 30 years, that plea, family first, had been the chain around my neck. It was the phrase that forced me to cancel vacations, to work double shifts, to accept a salary that was barely above the poverty line while Sophie lived in luxury. "I can't undo it." "Mom," I said gently, "the Northline Care Trust is an independent legal entity. It has a board of directors. I answer to them now, and honestly, even if I could undo it, I wouldn't." Sophie was still standing, clutching the back of her chair as if it were a life raft. She looked at the debt figures on the page, then at me. The defiance was draining out of her, replaced by panic. "I never wanted this," she whispered. Her voice broke. I didn't want the debt. I didn't want the audits. I just wanted—" "You wanted the image," I finished for her. "You wanted the founder's daughter title. You wanted the ribbon cuttings and the interviews about your vision. You wanted the pretty parts." Sophie's head snapped up. "You are humiliating me. You planned this whole dinner just to embarrass me in front of everyone." "No, Sophie," I said. "I planned this dinner to give you a choice." I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of her. The room watched us. The two sisters. The two halves of the Ellison legacy. "Read the letter again," I said. "It is not a resignation. It is an offer. You can still be the director. The trust will issue you a provisional license. I have set aside funds for a 6-month training program. I will teach you the regulations. I will show you how to manage the staffing ratios. I will help you." Sophie stared at me, her eyes wide. "But," I added, "you will have to actually do the work. You will have to be at the facility at 7 in the morning. You will have to answer the state surveyors when they walk in. You will have to understand that we cannot afford a coffee bar because we need to pay for wound care supplies. If you are willing to learn, I will support you. I will be your safety net." The offer hung in the air. It was the ultimate test. If she truly wanted to lead, here was the path. It was steep, it was hard, and it was unglamorous. Sophie looked at the binder. She looked at the debt summary. She looked at the reality of what running an elder care facility actually meant. The smells, the paperwork, the constant, grinding pressure of keeping people alive. She started. She looked at our parents, waiting for them to save her, to tell her that she could still have the title without the work. But Mark was silent. He was staring at the table, finally realizing the trap he had built for himself. He had wanted the illusion of control. He had wanted to pretend that Sophie was the genius and I was the help, but the paperwork now matched the reality. He couldn't have the fantasy anymore. "I can't do that," Sophie admitted, her voice barely a whisper. She pushed the papers away from her as if they were contaminated. "I don't want to report to you. I don't want to be watched. I don't want to deal with compliance and audits." She looked at Mark, her face crumbling. "You said I could just be the visionary. Dad, you said Nora would handle the boring stuff." "Nora is handling it," Alicia Cortez said from the back of the room. "She is handling it by ensuring that incompetence doesn't bankrupt the facility." Sophie let out a sob of frustration. "I can't do it. I don't want it. Not like this." She grabbed her purse from the floor. "Keep it," she yelled at me, her voice shrill and childish. "Keep your stupid nursing home. I am going back to the city." She turned and ran out of the room. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. My mother made a noise of distress and started to follow her, but Mark caught her arm. He didn't move. He just looked at me. "So that is it?" Mark asked hoarsely. "You are the boss now? You are in charge of my house?" "I am not the boss of your house, Dad," I said. "I am the administrator of the care system. You still own the buildings. You are the landlord. Northline is the tenant. As long as you maintain the property and we maintain the standards, the rent checks will keep coming. You can retire. You can actually rest." I reached into my purse. I pulled out a ring of keys. There were 4 keys on it. The master key to the front door, the medication room key, the office key, and the key to the supply closet. I placed them gently on the linen tablecloth next to the untouched ceremonial binder. "But I am done being the daughter who fixes everything for free," I said. "I am stepping down as your assistant manager effective immediately. Northline will hire a qualified professional administrator to run the day-to-day operations under the trust's license. I will serve on the board of the trust to ensure oversight, but I will not be the one unclogging toilets at 3 in the morning anymore." "Nora," Denise whispered, looking at the keys. "What are you doing?" "I am resigning from the family dynamic," I said. "My responsibility is to the residents and to the trust. It is not to your pride." I turned to the guests. They were watching me with a new expression. It wasn't pity anymore. It was respect. "I am sorry for the disruption to your evening," I said to the room. "Please, finish your dinner. The trust looks forward to continuing our work with all of you." I signaled to Alicia and Dr. Mercer. As I walked toward the door, Mrs. Gable stood up. She didn't say anything, but she reached out as I passed and squeezed my hand. It was a firm, professional grip. Then Sarah from the hospital stood up. Then the mayor's wife. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just stood, a silent acknowledgement that they knew exactly who had been keeping the lights on all these years, and they were relieved that the keys were finally in safe hands. I walked out of the private room, down the long corridor of the restaurant, and out the front door. The night air was cool and crisp, smelling of rain and asphalt, It was the cleanest thing I had smelled in 10 years. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking a deep breath. My chest felt loose. The crushing weight that had sat on my sternum since I was 14 years old was gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was a text message from the administrator of a facility in the next county, a woman I had met at a conference once. "Hey Nora, heard a rumor you are consulting now? We are having trouble with our state compliance. Would love to hire you to come take a look. Let me know your rates." I looked at the screen. I smiled, a faint, real smile that reached my eyes. I typed back, "I can meet next week. My rates are double for rush jobs." I hit send. I walked toward my car, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward myself. I had spent my life building a system to protect them, but in the end, the system had set me free. The revenge wasn't that they suffered. It was that for the first time in history, I didn't. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Lila Revenge Stories. I would love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening to this story right now? Drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people. Your support means the world to me.